Let's cross live now to Patrick Henningsen, a geopolitical analyst and journalist, joining us here with rolling breaking news coverage here at RT International. Good to see you today, Patrick. Tell us about the significance here of Russia's recognition of Donbass independence. Clearly, a lot of people saying right now that Putin can't legally do this. It doesn't actually have any effect for the breakaway regions. But what are your initial thoughts?
My initial thoughts are that this more likely was on the cards for maybe a longer time than many people would have liked to admit. I even believe that, of course, despite the rhetoric that you're seeing out of Washington and London, they were very much aware that this was a possibility, considering the fact that the Minsk Accords were really going nowhere for a very long time. So this is effectively a stalemate. And so I believe that all the activity and all the hysteria that you've seen since maybe the beginning of December coming from the West was really an attempt to break this stalemate one way or the other, or force some sort of a move to advance the situation a bit further. And I've always believed, and I'm not alone, of course, that the West has always sought to obliterate the Minsk Accords. Certainly that was President Poroshenko's position at every turn, to sabotage, to undermine it. And that more or less continued on to the current administration in Kiev with President Zelensky. So no effort really made to break that stalemate, to advance things further. And, you know, the inevitable result at the end of that always would have been some level of recognition or autonomy for these people's republics of Donetsk and Luhansk, these breakaway regions. And so I think what we're really witnessing here, it is historic, what's happened here, but is really President Putin and the Russian government have effectively sprung the trap that the West had laid by undermining the Minsk Accords for so long. I'm talking about the United States mainly, and those pro-U.S. and pro-NATO factions within Ukraine. So all President Putin did today really was kind of move the ball a little bit further down the pitch.
Moving the ball down the pitch, Patrick, but also getting a lot of reaction, fast and furious here. It's riding feathers around the world. A lot of people are kind of huffing and puffing over this. Boris Johnson has rushed to condemn Putin's move as a violation of international law, but perhaps he's right.
Well, you can interpret it that way, but you know, when has international law ever been observed by the United States and its allies recently? It's really a relative concept. From a Western point of view, we're into power politics here. We're into power geopolitics. So, yes, it's going to elicit a massive reaction. Like with Syria, you kind of liken this to the October of 2015 when Russia announced it would be entering the Syrian conflict on the side of Damascus, and really setting the pace from that point forward. That changed the trajectory of geopolitics in the Middle East, and certainly in the situation in Syria. You could have the same situation from today forward, but I think I think all bets are off at this present time. It's very difficult to say how this is going to play out, but certainly somebody believed that something needed to be done now, because the situation, all the hysteria that we've seen over the last month or so with regards to the Russian invasion and the announcements daily that are coming out, the crazy announcements coming out of Washington in terms of intelligence leaks, it really does seem, and all the weapons pouring into Ukraine, it does seem like a very, very dangerous situation has been building up over the last 2 months.
Patrick, talk to us. You had mentioned just there, I guess you're alluding to that, of the Western media and all this fear-mongering over recent weeks and months. And, you know, I think they've been really detrimental to people's health, to be perfectly honest with you, the way they've been fanning the flames of war and reporting pretty gory stuff as well. Talk to me, though, about the Western media here, because what about the coverage of Vladimir Putin? Some of them are already calling this, with his recognition of the breakaway republics, some of them calling it a Russian land grab. I suppose it could be.
The Putin and the Russian obsession, it's been ramping up especially in the United States. It's taken on a whole sort of partisan political characteristic to it, especially with Donald Trump's election. And so that's really baked in to the Western psyche that everything about Russia must be bad. Vladimir Putin is sort of a Blofeld type character to the American mainstream media. It's almost like comic book characterization, and then they talk about it on Fox or MSNBC or CNN like it's sports, basically sports commentary. And they're coming up with various leaks are coming out, like Russia has a kill list, and they're planning a blitzkrieg to Kiev, and they're going to brutally shell the capital with 2.8 million people, and the siege of Kiev and so forth. So they're painting these pictures. And I think the object of this propaganda onslaught by the Western press and Western intelligence agencies is also pointed at the people in Ukraine itself, to kind of somewhat keep the population on edge of an imminent Russian invasion, and then they would likely run to the West or accept more aid and help from the United States, get more involvement from NATO member states in helping to bolster Ukraine's defense and so forth. But more importantly, that propaganda is towards Western audiences in order to get some kind of a mandate that this is a good foreign policy direction to take to talk up a war with Russia, using Ukraine as this kind of neutral playing field, or this pitch. But the reality is, Western politicians, and this might come as a sour note for some people, but they really don't care about the Ukrainian people, I would say, as much as they cared about the Iraqi people or the people of Afghanistan. Ukraine is really a means to an end in terms of NATO and in terms of Washington and in terms of great game geopolitics. So, I mean, unfortunately, as history bears that out in so many other different situations in other theaters in recent decades.
Patrick, you bring in you take us to the other side of the Atlantic. You bring in the U.S. angle here. I wanted to ask you, if you would take us to Washington D.C. right now. It's about 3:15 Monday afternoon. What's Biden doing? Is he in the Situation Room? Is he getting an update? What do you think?
I couldn't tell you what Joe Biden's doing. That's anyone's guess. But there is a very big national security committee that surrounds Joe Biden, and so it's probably numbering and up to a few hundred people, much the same as it was, or maybe even bigger than under President Obama. But look at the spokespeople from this committee or the national security team led by Jake Sullivan, who is under fire right now in terms of being implicated in the Durham report with Hillary Clinton and that campaign fabricating evidence of a so-called link between Donald Trump and Russia. All that's going on domestically. And at the same time, the media is very, I think, keen to project as much as possible onto the situation in Ukraine. So, but in this case, I think Russia has initiated a series of events. Certainly, there's going to be calls in Congress and the Senate for punitive sanctions against Russia. They've already been drawing up sanctions lists, the mother of all sanctions, preemptive sanctions, and so forth. But the reality is now that the situation is fundamentally different now, as Moscow is recognizing the Donetsk and Luhansk. But if you really want to take this debate backwards a little bit, look at the situation in Kosovo. And that is a sort of a statelet that has never received full recognition internationally by all parties, and really is the result of what many would call an act of aggression by NATO in the heart of Europe. 74 straight days of bombing by the United States under President Bill Clinton. And that debate rages, and the recognition issue continues to this day. And ditto with Crimea. If you want to talk about international recognition there. And so you've now extended this conversation to eastern Ukraine, to Donetsk and Luhansk. And so if you really fold it into the situation with Crimea and consider these two things as very similar or part of the same issue, they're born out of a situation that came from February in 2014. This was a coup. Ostensibly, it was a Western-backed coup. You never hear this mentioned by any Western politician in their discourse, by any mainstream media in the West. And so everything that resulted from that, the lustration in eastern Ukraine, the denying of parliamentary representation by Russian-speaking or certain political parties, outlawing Russian language, the split of the Orthodox Church, effectively ethnic cleansing in some cases.
Well, as you say, Patrick, this all happened, as you say, you know, in the wake of the 2014 Maidan revolution. In fact, Putin was saying just a short time ago during his speech that the MPs in the Ukrainian Kiev Duma who came in post-Maidan were essentially bought, corrupt and criminal in behavior. He said that essentially Ukraine has become a colony of puppets. What do you think, Patrick? What do you think is going to come next? We've been showing pictures of people in the breakaway republics celebrating, waving Russian flags, doing fireworks too. But then, of course, you've also got people who are deep in the trenches too, where shelling has increased on both sides, according to the OSCE, by up to 400 times. What happens next? What are the people in that region going to bed to tonight, do you think? What are they going to wake up to?
That's really anyone's guess. There could be some vociferous reactions coming from the Ukrainian side as a result. I'm sure there's a lot of pressure from Washington, pressure on Kiev, on President Zelensky, to do their bidding. This has always been the case, really, since the beginning of his presidency, and before that with President Poroshenko. So, you know, there's a lot of pressure put to bear on Kiev. There's also in Ukraine, you have an economic depression that's a direct result of the hysteria whipped up in the West of a Russian invasion. What they've lost economically as a result of this campaign, if you will, this propaganda campaign in the West, is the equivalent of economic sanctions against Ukraine. That's the level of economic devastation that's been wrought on the country of Ukraine. Even President Zelensky is trying to convey this to the Western politicians and to the Western press. So, I mean, they've already suffered badly by being used as a sort of football for NATO. So, you know, I don't think the cost has already been borne on Kiev economically, and so the question is how much pressure and how much gifts of loans or financial aid or armaments is the United States and its NATO allies going to be plying Ukraine with in order to keep it in a certain orientation vis-a-vis the situation which has now come to this point with regards to Donetsk and Luhansk. So that remains to be seen.
Well, it's early days yet, Patrick, and there are hopes that Putin and Biden might get together with a Macron-brokered summit, hopefully in sometime in the near future. So early days yet, Patrick. We'll see what happens. Patrick Henningsen, a political analyst and journalist, joining us live here on RT. Always a pleasure. Thanks very much. Well, as we understand, thousands are being evacuated to safety here in Russia as bombs continue to pound the Donbass republics and, as we understand, unprecedented numbers. Now, more than 13,000 people have now died since the start of the Ukrainian conflict. Almost a quarter of the victims are civilians. More than 23,000 have been injured, and more than 1 million Ukrainians are now displaced. We heard from some of those who have been living through the horrors of this war.
Would you have wanted this for your child? Would you? I also don't want this for neither of my grandchildren. Do you know that heads have been blown off before their parents' eyes? And we know how parents hid their 3 children in a bathroom and they all got blown up there. You don't know this.
This situation started back in 2014. Then, my son became disabled, my daughter-in-law died, and 1-year-old grandson received a head injury. Of course, we are now very, very afraid.
In our village, there is constant shelling. We decided to leave because a missile landed at our apartment building entrance.
There's such tension here. In the morning, there was an explosion again.
We are going to Russia, running away from the shelling with my wife and our daughter and granddaughter.
I came here from Donbass together with my children. Yesterday I was walking to work, but it's impossible, so much shelling.
I don't want to come back. It's very dangerous there. I lived there and don't want to anymore.
They say if they get to our territory, to Donbass, no one will be left. They won't even spare children. They'll destroy everyone.
It was very scary. The shells were flying. I'm scared for my grandchildren and my children.
They call us saying there's heavy shelling. Why are they shelling? I'm not afraid. but you couldn't leave me alone. I can barely walk. My wife is scared. She came under heavy shelling. I wouldn't have left. I stayed there in 2016, not leaving. I wouldn't have left. I'm not afraid of anything. It's all the same to me. I'm used to it. I was a soldier in the past. I'm used to it. But her, she's shaking, stuttering. If I were healthy, I would have joined the militia.
Meanwhile, Kiev says it is committed to the Minsk agreement, although it wants certain amendments made to the peace deal. It accuses Russia of violating the agreement and blames Russia for the current escalation, adding Moscow attacked eastern Ukraine to fabricate accusations against the Ukrainian military. It just gets more and more murky by the moment.